Everybody, this is Dream, and so we're gonna go ahead and get started into the daily fantasy for Fanduel today. This is my 5x5 spreadsheet. What I mean by that is I put up the price of each player, and then I see how many times if they 5x and 6x in the last 10 games. Obviously, it's early in the season, so there's not even 10 games yet. So lots of players only have 3 or 4 or 5 games. But basically, we're just going to kind of go through each team and kind of give an idea about what to expect from the players on those teams and who we might want to target and whom we might not want to target. So without further ado, let's get into the games. So first of all, I'm going to point out that the Orlando-Toronto game is one of the lowest scoring games on the thing, and Toronto's heavy favorite to blow them out. So it's unlikely that that game is going to be very useful. Whereas you have games like Indiana and Brooklyn, which you have high scoring, and then you have games like Sacramento and New Orleans have high scoring and actually close game. Also, Portland and the Clippers have a pretty tight scoring a game plus a high total. So without further ado, let's get into the individual teams. So first, the Orlando Magic, as we can see, like Mohamed Bamba and Wendell Carter, excuse me, both have pretty solid history in the last few this season so far. Bamba has a pretty decently high floor at about 25 points, but obviously we need quite a bit more than that to 5x today. But he's had a couple games that he's done really well. This matchup is not ideal for him because of the slow down nature of this game. Same with Cole Anthony. He's had some up games, but his floor is pretty low. You could also look at Wagner as well as a play that could be pretty decent today. His price has come up though since the beginning of the season, but he's got a pretty solid floor at around 20 points, so uh, he could be a pretty decent like value play today. And probably not the best, but probably somebody you would look at from a tournament perspective. All right, so let's get into the Raptors. Well, there is some like pretty good prices on some of these guys like OG and Trent Jr., but the slowdown of the game definitely makes you worry, and the fact that it's blowout potential. Like OG and Oakley has been really good so far this season. Um, Prince Achua has also a pretty high floor, and so there's several guys on this team that you might target. Maybe one of them for your big big GPs, but for the most part, probably going to be avoiding most of these guys, despite them having some, Gary Trent might be a decent play today. I'm not sure if he continues to start, then he could be a decent play. Let's go ahead and go into the Hornets. And so, what we got looking at here, so basically, the only guy that really stands out today is Miles Bridges. Though there is rumor that Terry Rozier is going to come back today. And if that's the case, this could potentially hurt the overall value of most of these guys. Not only that, but they're playing against the Heat, which are a slow down team and they're a defensive team. So, there's not going to be a whole lot here that we're going to really target. If you really wanted to scrape the bottom of the barrel and Rozier sits, then Cody Martin might be a sneaky value play. But even that, his price has kind of come up because he's been playing pretty well. So, as for the Miami Heat, however, we have some interesting positions here with Dwayne Dedman being pretty cheap, and he's eclipsed 20 points in 3 of the 4 games. However, he has a very low floor, and so we do want to worry about that a little bit. But if Bam is out, which isn't likely because it's just a probable tag, then he could definitely get a boost. Everybody on this team is a little bit higher priced than they normally are, and that probably is going to hurt their usage of these guys. Bam, he's been getting 15 rebounds, a game or whatever, but he's still barely hitting 40 fantasy points a game. And of course, Jimmy Butler has that 50, 60 point potential. But his price has also come up a little bit since his last 2 games have been 56 plus. But he does have a pretty low or pretty high floor. Like, you're probably not going to get less than 40 out of him. So he's not a terrible play, but there is a risk of a blowout here. Um, so let's go ahead and move down into the next 2 games. So we have the Pacers and the Nets. So first for the Pacers, we do have a little bit of a risk here with some of these guys because LeVert is potentially coming back today. I forgot to put his questionable tag. If he does come back, then that would definitely probably harm Duarte and also McConnell, who are definitely going to get boosts because of Malcolm Brogdon being out. I definitely wouldn't pay for Levert until he's played a few games, though his price is pretty high. And, TJ McConnell could be a unique idea today, given the fact that when he starts, whenever Malcolm Brogdon is out, and he was really good last year whenever that situation arose. If he starts, I think he only had started a few games last year. He scored over 39 fantasy points. So his price is pretty good for that, except for the fact his price is a little high for what he's done so far this season in general. He's been playing about 20 minutes a game, and he's not quite averaging 20 fantasy points a game. So there's a potential chance that he could blow up today. So he's definitely worth looking at. It is a faster paced game, but it is also going to have a defensive issue with the Nets as well. But overall, there's some guys to look at there that are pretty decent. Justin Holiday is also interesting simply because Brogdon is out. But again, with Levert coming back, it could be a little bit risky. And he has an extremely low floor. Um, Sabonis, he hasn't been quite as good this season so far. He's been pretty consistent, but he's had a couple bad games from a scoring perspective. So it's going to take, a really good game for him to meet the places he does. And Brooklyn is kind of projected to kind of win this game by 8.5 points, so that could limit Sabonis overall. Let's go ahead and get into the Nets. So with the Nets, obviously Kevin Durant and James Harden are interesting plays. Harden has not been able to meet his salary all this season. His price has come down a little bit, but he's still not even hit it once based on his current salary. And so he's probably going to be a fade unless you just think that he's going to blow up in this game. Kevin Durant's been pretty consistent, but his salary's is still pretty high. And while he is able to get there, it's not going to be a guarantee by any stretch of imagination. Bruce Brown, with him starting now, he has a bigger potential, but his price has also come up quite a bit. So I don't know if he's going to be the best price either. Everybody on this team, like you can say that two or three of these guys between Aldridge, Brown, Harris, Griffin, and Claxton are going to 5x, but it's kind of like, well, probably two of them will. It's like which ones? So it's kind of hard to know exactly who you want to pick there. Let's go and get into Kings and the Pelicans. So Sacramento, we have Fox. He's a little bit overpriced currently, even though his price has come down based on the production he's giving. He hasn't broken the 10 assists in the game yet, and he hasn't been shooting the ball particularly great so far this season. Of course, that could break against the Pelicans, being the fact that it's the Pelicans and they don't really play defense. Uh, as for Harrison Barnes, his price has come up because he's played really well so far this season. He's no longer a value play based on his price. And then also the same can be true with Rashawn Holmes. He's got a high floor though, so getting to that 5x is still going to be tough because his salary is pretty up there. Davion Mitchell's salary is still pretty low, and he's getting 20 to 30 minutes a game, give or take. And so he definitely has the potential to be a good value play. He had a little more. He didn't have as many minutes against the Suns, but in a game like this where he could get a big lead or something, he might actually be able to play more. Not a whole lot else to look at from the Kings' perspective. They kind of don't. They do run a pretty long rotation, but most of those guys get 8 or 10 minutes, and so it's kind of hard to know exactly what they're gonna get. And none of them really ever score that much. So let's get into the Pelicans. So we got obviously Brandon Ingram and Valanciunas. Both of those guys look pretty decent today in this game because it's going to be an up or down kind of game. And, both those guys have been playing really well this season. I definitely think that they're pretty decent. And of course, Ingram has a very high floor so far this season and a high usage rate, too. Valanciunas does have a high usage rate as well. The one concern here would be that Josh Hart is coming back potentially, and if he does come back, then that could definitely upset a little bit of that, especially with Alexander Walker, who has been playing extremely well, and he's had one bad game, which was against Atlanta in his last game, but he's getting 30 minutes a game, and he's got high usage as well. Devonta Graham has also been pretty steady. His floor is a little bit lower than you would like, but he's been playing solid and he's getting stats all across the board, not just points. Um, as for the rest of the guys, there's really nothing to look at to be useful, especially if Hart's coming back. So let's go ahead and get up into the Dallas game against the Denver Nuggets. And so here we have, oops, went too far over. Here we have obviously Luka Doncic, who had a really bad game yesterday. He still managed to pull around a 32 fantasy point game, but he has not been playing great this season so far. He had a ton of turnovers yesterday, and he really didn't do much in the rebounding department like he normally does. He did shoot the ball a little bit better, but it wasn't enough to, boost him back up. I actually had him in my lineup yesterday, and I still ended up cashing even in the GPPs, but um, it was surprising to cash in those despite him only scoring, being a $10,700 salary. He might be a little bit risky unless he can get his stuff together, but the Nuggets, they're a pretty tough defensive team usually, so I'm not certain this is the best place you want to take a chance on him not repeating yesterday's mistakes. As for the rest of the team, like right now, Jalen Brunson obviously has been playing really solid, so he looks pretty decent. He's got a pretty high floor at about 20 fantasy points a game, so you could look at him as a good GPP option. Hardaway Jr. is definitely overpriced. Came up in price a little bit, which I wouldn't say he's overpriced, but he's pretty scoring dependent, and so it's kind of a risky play, I think. With Porzingis out yesterday, Cleaver went nuts. Ended up playing 30 minutes and getting a double double and things and scoring 48 fantasy points. I'm not certain that that's going to be a good indication of what he's going to do again. His price actually went down a little bit from yesterday, which is a little surprising, but yeah. Dwight Powell, on the other hand, he didn't really do a lot better than what he had been doing, and his price is up, so it's a little harder to consider him. And the same can be true for Reggie Bullock. Like, Reggie Bullock started yesterday, but he didn't even get 10 fantasy points, so against a little tougher team, I'm not certain that those guys are going to be the best options. But, Cleaver, if you believe in the Cleve, then maybe you go with him. So when we look at the Nuggets, we have some injury questions when it comes to Jokic. The Joker is questionable so far, and if he is out, then that would definitely benefit Aaron Gordon and also potentially Michael Porter Jr. And you could even look at JaMychal Green, who I don't even have listed here. But we'll have to wait and see on that particular thing, if he's out or not. Pretty much aside from Barton and Aaron Gordon, there's not a whole lot to like from this team because I mean Monty Morris has had one or two good games, but he has a pretty low floor. Despite the fact he's starting and playing 30 minutes a game, he's not doing a whole lot of production. Barton has a high floor, and you could probably feel pretty safe that he's gonna get you 5x today in this game. Same with Aaron Gordon, especially if Jokic is out. Though Gordon has a lower floor than you'd probably like from a traditional play. But let's go ahead and move on to the LA Clippers. So with the Clippers, obviously we have Paul George and Bledsoe and Jackson, who've been guys that have been useful so far this season in DFS. However, their prices have all come up, and you can see that they haven't 5x at these prices as much. Terrence Mann actually looks like a decent play because his price is still pretty solid for what the production he's been giving. And he's been playing about 25 minutes a game, but the risk with him is that he has kind of a low floor as well. I mean, he's had 2 games over 25 fantasy points and then 2 games under 17. So, um, not. I think Luke Kennard has been, he's got to be hit or miss, and his price has come up a little bit. So that's a little, there's not a whole lot there that we're too excited about. But this game could be a high-paced game, so it might be not the worst to try to throw a flyer on Paul George or even Eric Bledsoe today. As for the Portland Trailblazers, I feel like everybody is overpriced on this team except for the top two studs, which are McCollum and Lillard. They're kind of fairly priced, but even from more from what they normally do versus what they've done this season. Most of McCollum's games have been right underneath his 5x price today, with the exception of the one game against the Clippers, which was a little bit lower. So if that's any indication, then this probably is a fade today, just because the Clippers have a pretty good defensive team, and that's also the same for Mr. Lillard. And everybody else just seems like they're overpriced for what they've done so far this season, and it's a tough defensive matchup. So I'm pretty much not even going to be looking at too many of these players, with the exception of potentially Simmons, but only if Norman Powell is not back from injury. Simmons has been playing pretty well, and he even played okay against the Clippers the other day. But yeah, there's not really a whole lot from the Trailblazers that we want to look at. Last but not least, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Lakers game. So if we're looking at the Cavs, Evan Mobley has been playing really solid this season so far. His floor is a little bit lower than we'd like, but he has some, 5x upside and or 6x upside, so that's interesting. Granted, he's done that against Atlanta and the Memphis Grizzlies in faster paced games, but even against the slower teams, against the Clippers, he got 33, and Denver he got 22. Uh, and if he gets the minutes, then he has a potential definitely to 5x in this particular game. As for the rest of the team, I mean, Sexton and Allen, they're going to kind of be hit or miss game to game, and they have high ceilings and low floors, and so you do have to be kind of wary about that. Also, Ricky Rubio's been kind of playing off and on game to game. Some games he's playing a lot of minutes, some games he's not playing quite as many minutes, and so he's kind of hit or miss from that perspective. His price has come down a little bit though from the beginning, where he had some big blow up games. But it's not the best matchup for him either. But it could be, depending on how you see this game going. For the rest of the team, like Kevin Love and Lauri Markkanen, they're kind of stuck in a gap with minutes. And so it's hard to really know which guy is going to get the most minutes to see who will get the 5x. But probably one of them will. As for the LA Lakers, we have a possibility that LeBron's coming back, and if that's the case, that's going to probably limit Westbrook a little bit more. But he still looks like a pretty decent play considering his price. It has come up, but it's not like way up. Um, he hasn't, if he can cut down on his turnovers, he would definitely be 5xing more and more. He's definitely playing a lot better and getting close to triple doubles every game now, which is what we like from him. And then, of course, Anthony Davis, he's always going to have injury risk, but his price is about what it's been all season. And, he's got a pretty high floor, 43 currently. So, definitely a little bit less than you'd want from a guy like him. But, he's got injury risk, so you always have to kind of paint that in there. If LeBron is out, Malik Monk is definitely somebody that you should target. He is priced about the same as he's been the last two games that LeBron is out. He's probably not going to 6 or 7x on you, but he'll definitely get you close to 5xing if you use him in this particular game. So, pretty much the rest of the team, they're kind of hit and miss guys. Howard and Jordan, they kind of take turns. Carmelo Anthony, Bazemore, all a little bit overpriced for what the production they've given, but they have an upside in this game, especially if it gets blowout potential. But the way the Lakers lost last game, I'm not certain that anybody's too worried about blowout potential. They haven't been able to hold a lead all season, so far. So that's pretty much what I got for this season. This day for for FanDuel. I'm not certain that it's a great slate. There's kind of a couple games here that could be useful in DFS, and there's several games that you probably just want to avoid altogether. But there is enough players that are doing pretty well so far that you might be able to create a pretty good team and take one of these tournaments, or at least win your 50-50 games with. So if you do find any guys that you think I've missed, feel free to leave a comment in the description, and have a nice day, guys.